Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the John Brademas Center and NYU DC Dialogues for this Salon series webinar. My name is Christina Bolin, and I am a third-year student in the Global Leadership Program at NYU Washington, DC. Today, we are joined with Danny Greenberg and Mark Levine, book editors of The Trial of the Chicago 7, the official transcript, a collection of verbatim excerpts from the trial that contains, in the parties' own words, not only the opposing philosophies of each side and virtually all of the significant courtroom confrontations between Judge Hoffman and the defendants and their lawyers, but also the bitter and often hilarious repartee that characterized so much of the trial. Aaron Sorkin wrote the book's introduction as well. Danny and Mark will join in conversation with Alvin Bragg, visiting professor of law and co-director of the Racial Justice Project at the New York Law School. Now, to tell you a little bit more about the trial of Chicago 7. The Chicago 7 were 7 defendants: Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Froines, and Lee Weiner, charged by the United States federal government with conspiracy, crossing state lines with intent to incite a riot, and other charges related to anti-Vietnam War and countercultural protests in Chicago, Illinois, during the 1968 Democratic National Convention. This new edition of the Trial of Chicago 7 is published concurrently with the release of Aaron Sorkin's award-winning movie. You can purchase the book at chicagoconspiracytrial.com. Again, thank you all so much for joining this event. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature. We will definitely look at your questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Alvin to begin the discussion.
Thank you so much, Christina. It is an honor to be with you all tonight, and particularly here with Mark and Danny, whose great reputations precede them in not only for this work, but for their careers. And so I'm so excited to be in discussion. I've got the book here. I know we had it on the first slide. It is such a illuminating and interesting read. And I'll say, so I'm a litigator by trade. I've tried a number of cases, and I like trial transcripts. So I read trial transcripts. But it strikes me that that's not something that the average person does. And I wanted to start just kind of getting the origin story for this. Like the book is literally trial transcripts, which you've sort of curated and made into, you've really brought alive. So I'm curious about a couple of things, sort of what got you to think about it, focused on the trial transcript, how you sort of culled it down. And I know now I'm asking a question I couldn't ask in the court of law. It's like triple compound. So let's just start with, what gave you the idea to do this? What inspired you to focus on the trial transcripts as the central feature?
Well, by the way, in terms of the transcript, I think you find it, lawyers frequently find transcripts fascinating. I think the general public can be bored by them. And so what we did here is we cut down the transcript that was 22,302 pages into a manageable size. We cut out all the boring stuff, and we basically took what we considered all verbatim from the transcript, the highlights of the trial, stuff that would show the confrontations and the philosophies of both sides. But what we did back, this is my first year of practicing law, just graduated law school, and I was reading the New York Times accounts of the trial. And by the way, just one important addition, if I may. Christina mentioned the trial of Chicago 7. It started out as a trial of the Chicago 8. And I think it's really important to remember the 8th defendant, Bobby Seale, because he was then and still is a key player in what's going on in the world. I hear him speaking periodically at college campuses, and he's very impressive. But we were reading about the trial in the paper in the New York Times. Anthony Lucas was covering it, and there was not a lot there. You know, this is the age before 24-hour TV, before 24-hour cable. And the little that we read in the paper it just struck us what was going on there was outrageous. We could not believe what was going on there. We could not believe what was being said and what was happening. Mm-hmm. And we basically thought, more people have to know about this. More people got to know about it. I mean, the movie is only part of it, by the way. I mean, what I tell people, if you like the movies, read the book. But we figured, how do we get people to know about the outrage? Because Danny and I were among people who were marching. So is our third co-editor, George McNamee, and a lot of friends who did this. So we thought more people had to know about this. And this was actually a month before the trial ended. We got the idea. And we called up the court reporter. And we asked if we could buy the transcript. And again, remember, this is the time before FedEx, before fax, nearly before word processing. So she agreed to sell us the transcript. We got the first 15,000 pages. We paid her $900, and there was no FedEx then. So she agreed to ship it to us, but she had to bring it to the airport there. And Danny had to get to LaGuardia Airport at 4:30 a.m. I think. Was it 4:30 a.m., Danny?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, at 4:30 a.m. to meet the plane and get this bunch of transcript off the airplane. And what we did was, we couldn't have done it ourselves because, as I say, it's really voluminous. The trial was, we didn't know it then, but the trial was winding down. I mean, we got the idea for this, I think it was January 29th. We got the transcript, I think it was February 7th or so, February 4th. So we got a bunch of friends together, a lot of good friends, around 25 or 30 people, friends of ours, classmates of ours, colleagues. And in our apartment, my apartment on 83rd Street, we had people 24 hours a day, basically, reading the transcript. Danny was coordinating everybody, handing out the segments. We gave everybody sections of the transcript to read. We said, go through these. If something strikes you as unusual, pull it out. We want to be fair. We want to be down the middle. But we want to show the contrasts. We want the sound bites, the memorable pieces. We wanted to show the class of cultures, because what was going on there was incredible. And that's what these, and so we had some friends at midnight sitting in bathtubs, eating pizza and reading transcript. We did this virtually around the clock. Friends were coming in the apartment, people coming in and out all the time. And we put together the transcript.
You know, I would just add to it, because that's totally accurate, but I would add to it that Mark was really the person who did this. He was the one who had the idea. He was the one who worked on it. He was the one who got us all together. And even the reissuing of the book 50 years later was his brainstorming and his ideas. So I appreciate the we in all of this, but Mark was really the linchpin of what went on.
Well, and it sounded like there were a number of other people involved in the endeavor. Did y'all give them any sort of, you know, guideposts or guidelines beyond sort of, does it jump out to you? Just curious how you went from the trial transcript to this, you know, sort of digestible, very, as you know, publicly accessible to a layperson. Yep. Were there any ground rules on how to sort of call out?
We did. First of all, we said, if you're uncertain whether to pull something out or not, pull it out. Because then Danny, George McNamee, the third co-editor, I would read it and make the final decision of what would go in. But we basically told them we wanted to show the cultural class. We wanted to show the contrasts, the repartee. What was amazing to me, the little I read in the paper, some of the dialogue. I mean, you had Julius Hoffman, say, you know, consul would say something, a wine glass would say something, and he would say, "Thank you, Your Honor," and then the judge, "Don't thank me. I didn't do it as a favor to you." That's what Julius Hoffman did. There was stuff like this. We read about Bobby Seale being chained. So we told people, if it's interesting, pull it out. We want to show we want all those verbal exchanges, because that's what's interesting in reading this. It's almost, I hesitate to say it, but it's almost like reading a joke book, because the one-liners back and forth are outrageous. You would not believe what happened in that courtroom. I don't believe it. And I say, what Sorkin does, he even took it easy on everybody. I mean, what happened was even worse. The trial was worse than the movie. The trial was incomprehensible. And so those are the guidelines we told them. These are all intelligent people, said, if you think it's interesting, pull it out, because people are going to want to read it. And that's what we did. And we also want to make sure we had the philosophies of both sides. So we did that.
Well, let me ask a follow-up question. You just said that, and as I was reading it, I was like, smiling and audibly laughing. You two obviously know this material, better than anyone watching. Do either of you have sort of a favorite exchange from the trial that you kind of, I don't know, in your version of the book, you've got, triple highlighted with a sticky on it. If you had to pick one or two most memorable moments, is there anything that jumps out to either of you?
Well, as he was in life, I think that Abby Hoffman was really a key to all of this. Not only the humor, his initial examination, which is captured a bit in the film, is really brilliant. Where were you born? I was born in the 1960s. Where were you born? I'm like the Sioux Nation. I carry my history around with me. What year was that? That was the year of Woodstock. I mean, it was so clever, but it was also very moving. His closing, in the movie, the closing is Tom Hayden reading names. That's not what happened. But each of the defendants was given the ability to talk, and they were quite moving. Abby said, I grew up in Boston. I grew up a stone throw from Lexington and Concord. I was there when Paul Revere yelled, "The pigs are coming, the pigs are coming." And we had a revolution for things that are far less important than what's going on now. So I think that, in some ways, we wondered that it took that long for Hollywood to make a movie about it. This was the most cinematic trial probably ever. The defendants made a decision about how to behave, and the judge played right into their hands. And it made each page illuminating about what happens when somebody takes on a system and says, it's not going to be usual. It's not going to be as usual. Alvin, you said you're a litigator. I too, I litigated hundreds and hundreds of cases. Neither of us could ever experience anything close to what happened in that trial. And we could talk about it later. But in the end, it may have been a brilliant, brilliant strategy. As absurd as it was, the charges on appeal were mostly dismissed, in part because they were able to goad the judge into playing their game rather than sitting there quietly and letting the system overwhelm them.
That's fascinating to think that and I do want to come back to that concept of the role of the judge here compared to other litigation. But Mark, let me ask you, is there a moment or two from the transcript where it makes your smile widen and you say, I just can't believe that this happened?
There are so many things. I mean, that's what the Seventh Circuit, when they reversed this case, they said there were 150 examples of Judge Hoffman belittling the defense and the defendants. 150, and we probably have all of them. I mean, just let me read you some. At one point, Weinglass says something that he spent some time with a witness and the judge wasn't allowed to fully examine him. And Hoffman says, I've spent a good deal of time listening to you too. What do you want me to do? Do you want a gold medal? Do you want a gold star for the time you spent? I mean, that's on page 40 of our book. Or Kunstler cites the Constitution for something. And Hoffman says, well, we know about the Constitution way out here in the Middle West too, Mr. Kunstler. And then Bill says, on page 46, you're not letting me argue as long as I want. The court, no, you haven't anything to say that's important right now. In front of a jury, he's saying things like this. Bill Kunstler says something, and that's the word everybody knows is contemptuous, Bill says, and the judge says, don't tell me what I know. And then the objector tells me, I not only turn it down, I ignore it. This is what Hoffman is saying, verbatim. And it's outrageous. You would not believe it. I mean, he kept goading them on. So I can't think of any one thing, but it's just really a collection. It's like eating peanuts as you read these things. You just can't believe any one of them happened. And that's what really got us into doing the book, because we saw some of the stuff in the paper and we said, more people have to know about it.
Something that jumped out to me, which is not sort of a colloquy, but the first appendix, which is entitled Contempt Proceedings and Appeals, the list of contempt convictions. I mean, just reading it, and it goes on. I'm actually paging through it. it's page 343 to 346. I mean, I've been litigating for 20 plus years. I think I've heard a judge maybe raise the possibility of contempt in the courtroom a couple of times. The notion that in one trial there's 4 pages of contempt convictions is, it just literally jumps off the page.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. By the way, the movie has, and I understand movies, you have to fictionalize certain things to make it more palatable and dynamic. But the judge says, that's one count of contempt. That's another count of contempt. Hoffman never said the word contempt during the trial. He said, we'll look at that later. But there were 159 counts of contempt against the 7 defendants, another 16 against Bobby Seale. That's 175 counts of contempt. And they were all sentenced to jail for those contempts. After all the appeals, of the 175, after all the appeals went through 3 years later, only 13 survived. And none of them against half the defendants. Dellinger had 6 against Dellinger were survived, which was interesting because he's a pacifist. He never hit anybody. The movie hasn't hit anybody. Dave probably never hit anybody in his life, but he basically talked to the judge. He said, "This is bullshit. What's going on here?" And he basically criticized the judge. And those are the ones that the Court of Appeals upheld. But only I think 2 were against Kunstler, 2 against Abbey, 2 against Jerry. The only one survived. And interestingly, their antics with the wearing robes to court, which is in the movie, that was one of the contempts that the court upheld, that the appellate court upheld, because they felt it disparaged the judiciary. But virtually all the contempts, I mean, what the appellate court said, the Seventh Circuit, was basically, they were provoked by Judge Hoffman. Hoffman provoked them. And interestingly, when they appealed on the appeals, when the court sent it back to some of them to be retried, they wouldn't let Judge Hoffman handle it. They said it has to be somebody other than Judge Hoffman. He was too emotionally involved with it. And no other judge in the Seventh Circuit District Court wanted to handle it. They ended up getting Judge Janeau from Maine to handle the remaining contempts. And all those against Bobby were totally tossed out.
So I have a million more questions I could ask kind of on the origin story, but both Mark and Danny have raised, and I think it's one of the most interesting things about the trial, the role of the judge. And Danny, you mentioned sort of your career as a litigator, which certainly I'm familiar with. We talk a lot about, just to kind of tie this to sort of current day. We're talking about judicial appointments. We talk about the role of the judiciary. I'm curious to get your thoughts, both of your thoughts, about whether something like this could happen in a courtroom today, and how it would be received, and just maybe in that context, giving us more of a sense of how far out of bounds you thought the judge was here, and if you have any speculation as to why. I'd be very curious to hear that too. Danny?
Well, I was a legal services lawyer for 17 years. I went on to Harvard Law School, where I ran the clinical program, helping to teach students how to do this work. And then I ran the Legal Aid Society, the kind of, as you know, Alvin, the largest defense firm in the country. And then I've done pro bono at a firm. I say this not to be self-aggrandizing, but to say that my career basically has been as a progressive lawyer. I knew Bill Kunstler. I knew Lenny Weinglass. I was in the National Lawyers Guild when they were, and to this day hold many of the beliefs that they did. I think in one level, this trial was sui generis. There's never been as outrageous a judge as Judge Hoffman, and there's never been a group of lawyers who were so committed to their cause of their defendants that they worked with them. The notion in the film of Bill Kunstler saying there's no such thing as a political trial may have been one of the funniest things in the trial, because of course all Bill Kunstler did was political trials. All he ever took on, like this one, was understanding that. So in one way, it was sui generis. In one way, there was nothing like it. But if you ask me on a deeper political level, what goes on in courts for poor people, for dissidents, for marginalized people, for people of color in this country, I don't think that Judge Hoffman was that different in the sense of, did he side with the prosecution? Yes, all the time. Did he belittle or not like who the defendants were because of who they were, because of their lifestyle, because of the things they said, because of the truths they talked about America? I would say that much of the judiciary in this country is like that. They're much smarter, they're much straighter. They would never say those things in open court. They would keep things, but in the end, I think that the court system itself is much like what that trial was. I don't believe, for example, and I know I'm getting a little bit afield, but I don't believe when people talk about the criminal justice system being broken, I don't believe that it's broken for a second. I think it does exactly what it's supposed to do in the way that it treats the people who come before it and leaves alone the people who don't. So yeah, Judge Hoffman was unlike anybody else, but in the most profound way, how he treated Bobby Seale, how he treated those people, I would say that much of the judiciary, particularly state judiciary, is like that today.
And you say maybe getting far afield. I actually think one of the things as I was looking at this that makes it so intriguing and sort of really having this kind of anniversary moment for it is how timeless it is, how apropos and germane it is to things that and we can get into it a little later, literally happened this week, with sort of the way police are interacting with citizens and First Amendment and judge not just decorum, but as you say, really going to underlying issues. So I would love to continue kind of to go down that road as well. But Mark, any thoughts on this sort of issue, sort of the role of the judge and thoughts about whether that's out of bounds or out of step with what we see here? Any views of sort of how far afield this judge was?
Well, I say on a philosophical level, I certainly defer to you and Danny, because both of you have a lot more expertise. Alvin, I know you've done a lot of litigating, and certainly Danny has. I will say this, I don't think, I'm pretty sure of this, the trial would not have gone the way it did if there was a different judge. Hoffman was the third judge who was offered the case. First two judges who were asked to handle it said, not me, I don't want to touch this case. I read an article by his law clerk at the time, went to Julius Hoffman. He should have turned it down, but his ego was such that he could not turn down this case. He could not say, I couldn't handle this. So he took on this case. And without him, this trial would not have been very momentous. I mean, here we brought out this book as a 50th anniversary edition because people are still talking about it 50 years later. But with any other judge, this wouldn't have happened. I mean, so many of those contempts you cited, Alvin, so many of those 175 contempts happened after Bobby Seale was chained and shackled and gagged in a courtroom, which mind-boggling. That, at the convention, the demonstrations, these were the 1968 demonstrations in Chicago Democratic Convention, and when the demonstrations were going on and the police were clubbing the demonstrators, everybody was shouting, the whole world is watching, the whole world is watching. And they were. It was on worldwide linkage. But on that trial, when Bobby Seale, and by the way, none of this half-day stuff as in the movie, I mean, the movie pussyfoots it around it, I mean, takes it easy on the prosecution. None of this half-day stuff. Bobby Seale was gagged and chained in that courtroom for 4 days, 4. And every day he tried to talk, and so they wrapped it hard. They wrapped the bandages harder. They gagged him. At one point, they had one from the bottom of his neck over his head. And he said his head is throbbing. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. So the whole world is watching, and that's my reaction to the judges. Present day judges, I certainly leave that to you and Danny.
So something that and I hope you don't mind me asking this, but something that came to mind as I was thinking about this is, here we have obviously a momentous trial, and one that involved really kind of the full power, misguided as it may be, of the federal government, on the backs of what was happening in the streets outside the convention, and here you two come in very short order after the trial's over. Any pushback from the powers that be, from the federal government, or any concerns as you were doing it, saying like, wow, this is, we're really stepping out here?
Two things. I mean, you're right. We had this book out, literally, Bantam Books published the original edition. The San Francisco one is the 50th anniversary edition, but they had the book in bookstores 11 days after the sentencing. That's unheard of in publishing. 11 days, it was in people's hands. It was in the bookstores. On the powers that be, interestingly, I was at a very white shoe, stodgy law firm, and I was called up to the upper floor by the senior partner. Wanted to know what Mark Levine was doing with a book on the Chicago conspiracy trial. And I mean, granted, my whole generation of lawyers that started with me were the rebels in the firm. I mean, we actually wore blue shirts, and everybody else had white shirts, and we had some sideburns, and none of them had sideburns. And I was called, and I was told that I violated firm policy by publishing the book. And I was astounded, and I said, excuse me, sir, I don't understand. This was Ezra Cornell, who was the great-grandson of the founder of Cornell University. And I said, he said, well, you work for the firm? And I said, I was with the firm, I think, 5 months. And I said, I don't think anybody associates Mark Levine with the firm at this point. I didn't even say at this point. I was very deferential. And he said, well, you violated the firm. And he pulls out, goes to his top drawer, pulls out, top right-hand drawer, and he pulls out a memo that the firm had issued a year and a half before I started. It's a memo that was not in the firm policy manual, and I had read the firm policy manual a couple of times. And the memo said anybody wanting to publish anything had to get the firm's permission ahead of time. And I had violated that. I stammered and stuttered. Obviously, there was a reason for that rule, because of they didn't want any lawyers writing a law review article, which may have been contrary to a big case the firm was involved in. But in terms of the bigger, larger scene, I do remember some books we sent out to, I think it was Sister McAllister. We met some people from some of the nuns and priests who were involved in really putting themselves on the line. And Father Berrigan and I think Sister McAllister. And we sent them a copy of the book, and that came back, no such address. So we were not hassled personally. Danny?
I think the other way to say it, because Alvin, like you, I've thought about this actually a lot. I don't think there was anything brave in what we were doing. I don't think we felt that we were vulnerable. So I certainly didn't. I think about the generation before me in the National Lawyers Guild. I think about the lawyers in the 50s and what McCarthyism did, and how much they had to, if not suffer, but at least worry about what it meant to be a radical lawyer. By the time the late 60s and the early 70s came around, lawyers for poor people were brand new. The court system was reeling from suddenly all sorts of people in court who they never expected to be there, with a lot of advocacy for it. But I don't think that we ever felt vulnerable. If anything, we felt almost megalomania. We were going to change the world. We were actually taking it on. We were making a difference. We were in the streets. We were in the courtrooms. We were with our clients. We identified with them. We dressed like them. We went to court and we behaved the way we did. It was fun. I mean, it was fun. In addition to whatever else it was, which I hope was important, it was fun. And I don't think for a moment I felt vulnerable in doing the things that we were doing.
It's interesting, right? Because we all are approaching it from different perspectives. So from where I sit, having not lived through, I mean, I was born in 1973. So from my perspective, it does strike me as courageous, and it's something that obviously significant and impactful, but also something that it was not without risk. We're getting some questions coming in on the chat log now. I can encourage folks. I mean, I'm sorry, on the Q&A. Encourage folks to continue to send them in. One which has been touched upon a little bit, but we could go into more depth on it. And my guess is lots of folks want to know. A book that becomes a movie, a transcript that becomes a movie. I guess starting at the most general level. What are your general thoughts about the movie and its sort of, I guess, how much artistic license was taken, and are there parts where license was taken where you say, I don't know, I wouldn't have done it that way?
I loved it. I loved it. From my perspective, what we did 50 years ago, Mark alluded to this, was we wanted to get it out there about this trial and what went on. And if we reached 100, 150,000 people with a book then, we were thrilled about it.
So
but in the era in which we live now, with social media and with this movie, Aaron Sorkin in one fell swoop really reached millions and millions, tens of millions of people with an incredibly entertaining thing. Now, he didn't make a documentary. I didn't expect that he was going to follow the transcript. Clearly, he read it. Clearly, he understood it. Some of the trial scenes were fairly accurate. Others really weren't. He took license, and some of the larger ways he did it was the way he portrayed, for example, the tension between Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin on the one hand, and Tom Hayden. It's a complete theme of the movie. The reality is, on the first day in the movie, Tom Hayden is shaking his head. He's saying to Bill, oh my God, what are they doing? What are they doing? The reality is, on the first day of the trial, the judge says, who's that defendant waving his fist at the jury? And the answer is, I'm Tom Hayden, Your Honor. That's my customary greeting. So Tom Hayden later was certainly involved in electoral politics, to Abby being on the outside. But I don't think there was tension within the group about the way they were going to behave. I think it was brilliant, however, of Sorkin to write the movie that way. I don't take him to task, because I think what he did was he moved Bill Kunstler and the movie along on this trajectory, as if it begins with it looking outrageous that Abby was doing what he was doing. And then he moves us all along to see how outrageous the system was. And maybe it wasn't that outrageous after all. And even Tom Hayden comes to agree with it. I think that's fiction, but I think it is a good storyline, and one that I don't take him to task for doing at all, because, as I said, he's writing a movie. He's not doing a reality play. There are things that were different. Mark alluded to the treatment of Bobby Seale. Alvin, I know that you spent part of your career as an assistant U.S. attorney. Don't take it personally, but I think it's absurd to think that a U.S. attorney behaved at all the way Schultz behaved. First of all, Schultz was a minor character. Tom Ferran was the lead attorney. But the notion that the U.S. attorney is standing there going, oh my God, oh, I don't want to really have to prosecute. Oh, please, Attorney General Mitchell, don't make me do this. And stands at the end in solidarity with the reading of names. That's not what U.S. attorneys do. They prosecute. They're delighted to prosecute. The stronger their case, the better they feel. The longer they could put people who are dissidents in jail, the happier they are. It was a complete fiction to make him at all sympathetic, but it was fun. It worked. I thought it was a good movie.
I have a slightly different take than Danny on it. I agree with him that the movie is brilliant and it captures the spirit of the times and the spirit of the trial. But the trial, if you read the transcript or the excerpts from the book, the trial was far worse than the movie showed. The one line that Sorkin did take verbatim, took several lines verbatim, but not a lot of them. The one he did take verbatim was take that man and put them into that chair, take him into that room and you know what to do with him. That was on page 84 of our book. Hoffman telling the marshals to take Bobby Seale and do what you have to do with them. That was actually totally legitimate. That's not legitimate, but that's exactly what happened there. I'm troubled. I fully agree with Danny that to make a movie, you have to take a lot of creative license. But I think it also becomes an interpretation. And there's so much in the movie that if you read the book, you realize is different, that I just think it's important for people to realize that. And there, Ramsey Clark, and I mean, that ending, that really uplifting ending of everybody feeling good as Tom Hayden is standing there reading the name, did not happen. Did not happen. The trial ended really on an awful somber note with everybody being sentenced to jail. And it took several days before they could get even bail. So that didn't happen. Schultz, as Danny pointed out, no way was he sympathetic. No way did he go 2 hours after after Bobby Seale's in chains and said, we want a mistrial. 4 days. 4 days. He was not a soft-headed guy. He was not a sympathizer. I spoke to him recently. He still hates Bill Kunstler. And he still thinks Bill Kunstler rigged the trial by a whole bunch of ways. He doesn't have a good word to say for Bill, which is to Bill's credit.
Is it, Mark, can I jump in there?
Yeah,
if you're okay saying, what are you still in touch with him?
No, one of the things we did in this 50th anniversary edition, the transcript portion is the edited transcript portion is exactly the same as it was 50 years ago, but we did add two supplements. One we included about the post-trial lives of all the participants and the lawyers, and we also included a section on all the post-trial appeals, so everybody would know. But in order to do this, I could read, there's a lot of information about everybody, except for Dick Schultz. It's nearly impossible to find him. I was able to track him down finally, and we had a brief conversation. Didn't want to talk to me at first because I don't want to read that book, I don't want to hear him. But he's a human being, and we had a decent conversation. His wife was much nicer. We, by the way, I put on our website, chicago7trial.com, I have a bunch of related links. And one of the places I do have some links are of a panel discussion Schultz gave recently before the Bar Association out in Chicago. And it's really worth listening to get the other perspective. I don't agree with it, but it's worth listening to. But some of the things that are different from the movie, which I think people are interested in, Fred Hampton was great, but Fred Hampton was not killed while Bobby Seale was on trial. Fred Hampton wasn't killed till a month later. So the fact that Bill and Tom met Bobby in jail didn't happen. The fact that Bobby's reaction, he wasn't reacting to hate to Fred's death. He was reacting to being treated the way a Black person in this country is treated. I mean, Judge Hoffman, anybody, he didn't have his lawyer. He was going Sixth Amendment right to counsel. And he told the other people, wanted the white defendants, don't get involved here. This is me. This is the civil rights part of this. So that was not true. Ramsey Clark, who agreed he did not want to prosecute, but he never said that great heroic moment in the courtroom. He never said in the trial, even in the voir dire, he never said that the Justice Department had decided not to indict the defendant. He never said that they decided it was a police riot. This is, yes, it adds to the movie and it makes it a great movie. But I think if you really want to know, what happens, you really got to go to the source and you got to go to the transcript, or not the full transcript, because I think the full transcript is boring, but our sections, the way we've edited it down from 22,000 pages to around 300 pages, makes it very readable. Rennie Davis didn't walk around writing down names. And in terms of reading the names of the dead, Dave Dellinger did try to read the names of the dead on Moratorium Day, which is October 15th that year, first time asking almost for worldwide truce day off from the war. He did it before the court started, and Judge Hoffman did not let him continue. But what Dave was reading was not the names just of the American war dead. He was reading the names of the American and the Vietnamese war dead, because that's what we were protesting against in the 60s and 70s. We were protesting that we were killing innocent people in Vietnam, not just our soldiers, but it was a worldwide movement. So, and on a broader scale, and I mean, I know a lot of these, I have somebody calls a listicle of all the items where it's different. Where the movie has been criticized very heavily lately, one in a Counterpunch article by a guy named Dave Clennon, and actually back in October by a guy named Paul Glussman, who covered the trial for Ramparts. They said it's a typical Sorkin ending, happy, setting up a contrast and a happy ending, and it makes, as Danny referred to this, that made that Tom Hayden sound like voting is all important, that big confrontation at the end. That wasn't Tom Hayden's position. It may have been later in his life when he became a state senator, but this is Tom Hayden who wrote the Port Huron statement, a really radical statement.
What's interesting, I now editorialize a bit. It really is a advertisement for reading the book to get the actual, as you said, real account, which you all made come alive. And the risk, of course, of having it not be a documentary, but a film with artistic license is that some folks will accept it to be a documentary in history. So I see a risk there.
Nobody would be reading our book if not for Aaron Sorkin making this movie. So Danny's right. The fact that Aaron Sorkin brought it to the attention of everybody is incredibly important, because I mean, there are parallels between what happened back then in the demonstration and what's going on.
Well, that's what I wanted to address, Alvin. It seems to me that Mark undoubtedly is right. It makes very interesting reading. I wrote a piece for CNN Online about some of the differences. I think that what I was trying to really get to is that I think Aaron Sorkin did an extraordinary service to the country 3 or 4 weeks before an election that I could say, and we could all probably agree, was the most important election of my lifetime. What he did was he made accessible to people a number of themes. The Justice Department can be corrupted by a corrupt president. A court system can be corrupted by a corrupt president. Racism exists. It exists in the courtrooms. It exists on the streets. It exists then, it exists now. People who can band together and fight can win. They can defeat some of the things that go on. To me, those are the themes that he was talking about to the public, and those are the things that are incredibly important for people who are much younger than Mark and I are to understand and believe and know that what was going on in this country today was not new. It pervades the history of the country, and coming out at the time that it did, I thought it was extraordinary. So I don't think that you're hearing a disagreement about the notion of what did Sorkin do? What could he have done different? Read the book. It's fascinating because you will get those differences. What you're hearing is a little bit of a difference in the sort of the sense of it. I think that Aaron Sorkin is a hero. I think that what he did when he did it is incredibly, incredibly important for what it says about America today, much less than what it says. A police riot, imagine the police provoking a peaceful crowd and beating them up and bloodying them for no reason other than political gain. The parallels to today are just so obvious, and that he could do it with the Aaron Sorkin touch. I am so grateful that he made the movie that he did.
And there's a point. He's written a foreword for the book, and I actually wanted to ask you about sort of a comparison of then and now. But maybe I'll just read this piece of the foreword to sort of frame and just ask for your reflections of comparing then and now. So it's the bottom of page 14 in the forward. It says, now it was 2018 and it was time for another election. And this one would be a referendum on an incumbent president who often rhapsodized at campaign rallies about the old days when they take protesters out of here on a stretcher and said he'd like to punch that guy right in the mouth and beat the crap out of him. Signs that were waved in 1968, love it or leave it, what about white civil rights, and even lock them up were suddenly in vogue again. So, I'm going to assume that some people watching are like me and didn't live through the first chapter, but have lived through the second, and there'll be others like you who lived through both, but will be very interested in getting your reflections. Sort of, how do you compare the late 60s and the early 70s to this moment that we kind of are in now?
I'll let Danny go on that in a second, but I think one of the great things about the movie, by the way, as much as I love Sorkin and what he did, credit really goes to Steven Spielberg, who came up with the idea for the movie, which Sorkin himself admits. Spielberg asked Sorkin, "You want to do the movie about the Chicago 7?" And Sorkin immediately said, he says this in the introduction to the book, he immediately said, "I'd love it. I really want to do it. It's going to be great." And then Sorkin tells the story in the introduction. He then left Spielberg's home, and he called his father and said, "What's the Chicago 7? I don't know anything about it."
I love that he has that in the forward too, and I love the candor in the forward about that.
One of the great things about the movie, and I agree with Danny because it came out at a perfect time, and both Spielberg and Sorkin did that intentionally. They originally wanted to do it in 2008, but they didn't have the financing. But I think the movie shows that protest can be possible, that taking to the streets and mass action can make a difference. And I think that's incredibly important today with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. My concern is I'm terrified that the other people who may be taking this message are the idiots who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. And that's a whole new twist.
Yeah.
Danny?
Yeah, no, I think the parallels are just extraordinary. We make the mistake of thinking that Donald Trump was an anomaly in American history. The anomaly is the degree to which he articulated things that have been present throughout the nation's history. The degree to which he legitimized it, the degree to which the White House was the spokesperson for it. But those issues, racial equality, marginalization of minorities, power of the state, use of the state's power to destroy social movements, all of that goes back generations. There's nothing new about that. I think the 60s were a time of enormous ferment, enormous power of people in making change, and much change did come about. I think that the Obama years, my daughters who are very political and very aware, they didn't need to be in the streets during the Obama years, but they did, and they were, and they are during the Trump years. And, I can say nothing more than how delighted I am with the change of administration and the policies that are going forward so far and now. But I think it's absolutely accurate that the events of the 1960s and that trial and the events of today and similar trials today, there are enormous parallels.
Yeah. So we have a question in the chat which does speak to sort of the difference between the old and the new, and Mark spoke about it a little bit in terms of the old version of the book, the newer one, which is the addition of sort of where are they now? And so we've got a question about all of the defendants since the trial, and particularly kind of about Bobby Seale. So I don't know if you want to maybe do an overview, but focus on Bobby Seale in terms of kind of where they are now. And I'd also be interested in adding the kind of personal narrative, if you were in touch with them in building out the sort of where they are now. I think that would add some interesting flavor.
The only one I've really been in touch with is Lee Weiner, who I had email exchange with him just last night. But there are only 3 alive now. Lee Weiner, John Freunds, and Bobby Seale. Bobby Seale is incredibly impressive. He has there are a lot of online videos of Bobby Seale. telling young people to get involved. You know, the movie, the people back then was trying to make him this big ogre. He wasn't. He is urging people to run for office, to work in campaigns, to get involved at the local level in grassroots stuff. I mean, it's so, it's a continuation of what the Panthers were really trying to do before the press and other people started skewing their program, saying, I mean, they started giving breakfast programs in underprivileged minority neighborhoods. And Bobby, I have not spoken to him, but from what I've read and listened to him in these videos, he is urging people to get involved in local politics. Yes, it is like, and the same thing happened with Tom Hayden. So in effect, what Aaron Sorkin predicted in the movie, we have come to the point of people turning to electoral politics. And that's what Tom Hayden did, and that's what Bobby Seale is urging. The big thing, I think, though, is the demonstrations. I mean, Kunstler and Weinglass were just incredible. Abbey, unfortunately, you know, he died by suicide. It's really sad. He had some manic depressive problems and killed himself in 1989. If anybody is interested, by the way, in reading some really interesting stuff or seeing, there are real live hour-long interviews with each of the major, each of the 8 defendants plus Lenny and Bill. There's a link to it at the bottom of our website. A guy named Jeremy Kagan did a very good movie. I think it's called Conspiracy, the Chicago 8 or something like that. It's available on Amazon Prime. But Jeremy uses the transcript virtually all the way through. It's a very different from Aaron Sorkin's movie. But what he has there is 8 hour-long interviews with each of the people. And it's fascinating hearing them talk for themselves.
Interesting. Anyway, because we had an additional question come in, also focusing on Kunstler. Danny, you were mentioning earlier, sort of, you know, Kunstler's, you know, this is not a political trial. And of course, that's what he did. And parenthetically, I'll note, when I was growing up, my dad, who did not know Bill Kunstler, you know, told me, when you're stopped by the police, tell them you have a lawyer. And I said, well, Dad, who's my lawyer? He said, you tell him your lawyer is Bill Kunstler. I've always remembered that. But maybe if there's any color just from sort of just more about Bill Kunstler, I have a question sort of asking about sort of his statement about justice.
You know, I was 23 years old. I was sitting in my legal services office on the Lower East Side, the corner of Delancey and Orchard Street. It was a Saturday morning. I was preparing to do some family law work. My specialty was going into family court. The phone rang, I picked it up, and at the other end, the voice said, Danny, Bill Kunstler. I'm about to go into family court on Monday. I don't know anything about family court. Everyone says you're the guy to tell me. Brief me, tell me what to do. I talked to Bill for probably a half an hour. I hung up the phone and I turned to my colleagues in the office and said, I think I'm going to retire. I'm 23 years old and I don't think I will have a moment like this for the rest of my life. Bill Kunstler just called me for advice on a case. He was larger than life, and deservedly so. He was a human being. And as we know, human beings have frailties and have egos and have those things. But he was an extraordinary lawyer. He was someone who picked and chose his cases and did them with a fidelity and with a passion and got some extraordinary results. He got the acquittal of a man in the Bronx who shot at cops when the cops went into the house, and in a jury trial convinced the jurors, I think correctly, that when people barge into your house and you don't know who they are, that shooting them is not a crime. But I don't know.
I don't mean to cut you off, but you say that and I'm immediately thinking of Breonna Taylor,
well,
just thinking of the connections, right?
Well, of course that's right. But I don't know many people who could get the shooter off.
Yeah, no.
And Bill was able to do that. I think for those of us who were somewhat younger than him, joining progressive lawyers at a later time. He and Lenny were heroes. There were any number of people who survived the McCarthy era and came out of it somewhat unscathed, and then stood as the beacon for that next generation of us. And certainly those two were among them, and very generous to new and young lawyers.
And I did not know him, notwithstanding that my dad said he was my lawyer. But I did have the privilege of working with one of his daughters over the years when I was in government. And I can remember being out with her. We were doing a community meeting, on behalf of the New York Attorney General's office, and kind of somewhat kind of random meeting on a Friday morning in the fall, and we're walking out together, and there was a group of folks who were approached his daughter and started telling story after story of the impact her father had left. So obviously left us such an indelible mark. We have 4 minutes left, and I wanted to maybe end, and this is sort of broad, open-ended way about the advice you would give. We've been talking about the application of to today in its various forms, whether it's consular, getting an acquittal of someone who's shot at this officer, or whether it's the Trump years compared to the 60s. But as we have a whole generation really stepping to the front with its activism, just curious for the two of you who've lived this and studied this, and if you want to root it to the trial, or more broadly, sort of what your advice would be, sort of from folks who've lived it and studied it to folks who are now kind of picking up the torch. If you could give some, it's not unsolicited because I'm soliciting, if you could give some advice, one or two nuggets, I think that would be phenomenally interesting.
Danny? Well,
first of all, I'm enormously impressed with this generation. I don't know that I have to give them advice. Many of them are activists. Many of them have a consciousness about transgender rights, about gay rights, about the rights of minorities, and are doing perfectly fine on their own. I guess I would very briefly just say this. For people who are thinking of living a life, being a lawyer for poor people, or in any kind of political way, I think people mistakenly say to them, you're going to sacrifice a lot if you do that. And if what we mean by that is they're not going to make as much money as some other people, then it's true. But I think the greatest gift that I ever have is that I lived every waking moment of my life feeling that it was meaningful, that I was doing important work with amazing people all around me, things that were important, and that the time I spent just being awake and alive was enormously fulfilling. And if people look at that and think it's a sacrifice, that seems to me to be absurd. To do what you love and to have that be socially useful, I can't think of a greater gift that anybody could have. And I would urge people in whatever way that is, as social workers, as teachers, as doctors, as lawyers, whatever those things are, to try to live your life, that you don't have to wait until you're in your 70s to look back and say it's meaningful, but that every minute you live your life, you know you're doing something fun, interesting, important, and meaningful.
Well, thank you. I thank you for that. Mark?
On a slightly different note, I fully agree with what Danny says, and Danny's taken the path I didn't take. I went to corporate law, though I do a lot of voter protection work. I'm sort of disappointed in what my generation has done. One of the things I wrote in the dedication to the book, because I'm so impressed with what people are doing today, what young people and older people too. I mean, Stacey Abrams and the like, and the women leading Black Voters Matter. I put in the dedication, I dedicated to my great nieces and great nephews with the hope that their generation will succeed where ours has fallen short. Because I think for all that we did in the 60s and the 70s, there is so many problems that still exist. And that's why I'm so excited to see the way people are peacefully taking to the streets, and the way that people were organizing in Georgia with Reverend Warnock and everybody else. that's giving me inspiration, what they're doing, what people like you are doing, Alvin. That's what's giving me hope. By the way, one last thing, let me just say, you mentioned about Bill. Just a couple of things to point out how brilliant Bill was in an unconventional sense. Again, types of things that, nothing wrong. You couldn't put all these in a movie, have a 12-hour movie. But one of the days in the courtroom, and this is somewhere in our book, somebody sent the defendants addressed to the courtroom a bag of grass, weed. If the marshals had seen that, everybody would have been tossed in jail. So what Bill sees it and says, Your Honor, we just got some, I don't know what it is, we got some awful stuff. It's in here, and I think it would be very disruptive. So I think we ought to get rid of it. If you'd like me to take care of it and see that it's gone, I'll be glad to do so. And Hoffman said, yeah, please do, Mr. Kunstler. And from what I hear from people who knew Bill, defense had a great time that evening.
We're gonna end on that a colorful note. We are at our hour. I just wanted to thank all those who've joined us. We've had a very full webinar for the entire hour. Want to thank you, Mark, and you, Danny, not just for the hour, but for the project, for the book, for the focus on these issues, and for allowing me to be in the middle of this conversation with you. It's really been inspiring. And of course, I want to thank NYU for providing the platform, this conversation in particular, but also the series. So I thank you both. I thank NYU. I thank everyone who's attended. And with that, I wish everyone a very good night. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thanks.